Hi, I am the Farmobile digital specialist, Brianna Sneller. Today we have a very exciting episode because this is our very first visual Farmobile talk. As we are adjusting to what we are learning as our new norms, sometimes we have to adjust the digital side as well. So today I am joined by Steve and Bradford, and they're going to talk to us about how data is tracking the health of this planet. Steve, I'm going to pass it to you so you and Bradford can tell us a little bit how data is going to be a huge part of how we track the health of the planet.
Well, thank you, Bree. As you know, Earth Day, although through all this, what we've been going on, Earth Day is coming up on April 22nd, and it's an annual event that's been celebrated around the world here since 1970, and it celebrates the support for sustainability and the environment and natural resources across the planet. This year is obviously very interesting because not only are we worried about the health of the Earth itself, but very focused internally on the health of humanity on the planet that which we live. There's a lot of parallels for data in agriculture as well, and data in the environment. So with that, I'm going to kind of swing it back to Bradford here, and what are your thoughts on interesting similarities that we're seeing here between, say, the climate and sustainability models and what we're seeing with COVID-19?
Well, there's probably a lot of parallels, Steve. I think it's an interesting question, and not to shoot around the subject, because clearly there's a lot of businesses out there trying to talk about epidemic and pandemic and tie it way back to their business. This is one where I don't feel that this is forced or unnatural at all. I mean, I think when you talk about a tremendous set of diverse data sets trying to help people make good decisions about what's going on, benchmarking things, and then being able to say, how do we evolve the equation? This is, I think, a very extended and consistent comparison between tracking public health in the time of pandemic and planetary health in a time of unprecedented climate change. So those two have a lot of different parallels, and so it's probably a great way to make sure that we recognize Earth Day for what it is and for what it has been as a time to take a pause and think about the health of our planet as an ecosystem, and now also think about ourselves, right, as players in an ecosystem, that things change. And when you think of the relationships of people inside an ecosystem, sometimes you think about how we need to operate differently. And we also think about, quite frankly, what's the data guiding those decisions along the way.
Talk about the different layers, the different data layers that come off of a field, literally as an electronic field record, much in the same way that you talk about patient medical records. Can you kind of
Right.
kind of from your background, expand on that a little and what that means?
Well, I know in some of the discussions that even I've been a part of with you personally, Steve, with some of the largest non-governmental organizations on the planet who care about overriding conservation or environmental metrics, and then obviously wanting to respect how we tie those into the profitability concerns of producers and kind of return on investment metrics. There's a concern that, to use, I think, a term I probably stole from you, is that there's a first mile problem. And when I was in, for example, telecom, the problem was often referred to as a last mile problem, but it was that we could have this great, wonderful data infrastructure, but if they had to go through this tiny little copper wire to get to the person's household, they were still very limited in what they could get in terms of data access, right? The problem I think that you've helped highlight is now in agriculture, we have the reverse problem. We have not had good standardized data flow off of the farm into all of these great tools and engines that can help provide much better intel what's happening there. And that's the parallel to what we're dealing with right now in some ways with world health, is that when you don't have a standardized set of metrics and there's a standardized collection methodology to them, right, things become easily misinterpreted. And that puts people's economic stability at risk, and it puts bad decision making at risk as well. When you think of some of the modeling that we've all, as citizens, tried to put our mind around, we would say, well, why is the infection rate so much higher in Germany, right, than it is in Russia? You have to then understand if the collection methodology was different, so will be the outcomes, right, that influence that model. And obviously, you and I have seen that in a number of cases that I think we're starting to get better data sets, for example, collected around core crops like corn.
The states, especially customers that we work with in Ohio, Minnesota, really take this same agronomic data that is being collected, and especially collected through Farmobile, not only from just the farmer side, but now this data is starting to flow in bulk from the retail or the cooperative side that is really the other half of the. So how does that make a difference? And what does that even do to the models and I guess the transparency that we're striving for?
Well, I mean, I think to put it in fairly blunt terms, a lot of the work that has been done over the past, let's say, 10 years around sustainable ag or sustainable sourcing has still come around just trying to establish a flow of better information for what's actually happening, knowing that in some cases there's tremendous variation season to season just based on weather, right? There are a lot of variables that farmers deal with that are far more complicated than what other supply chains are used to dealing with. So if you don't have continuity of data, you have a risk of making uninformed decisions that go with that.
How can we basically get ahead of the curve as an industry by using this data?
I mean, Earth Day is a good time to step back and remind ourselves of a phrase I think that first was popularized when I was in college, which was, you have to think global but act local. And that phrase, maybe it still seems relevant, maybe it seems quaint to some folks, but I think it has a lot of relevance in agriculture. Every person who is a grower, who is a producer, right, has their own, frankly, ecosystem that they're managing. And that could be 300 acres, that could be 15,000 acres. But the same things that apply more broadly from an environmental perspective definitely can apply to them on a microcosm of what they're managing.
Along those lines, look at, in the past, obviously, in some ways, the sustainability message has been kind of a little bit muddled, or maybe not as clear as it should be, especially directly at the grower level, as far as, say, what are the check boxes that need to be checked, and truthfully, what data do I need as a grower to make sure that if not today, which it should be today, but what are those data points that are going to be needed in the future that I better start thinking about today?
Sure. Well, I think in your previous question, Steve, you hit on a subject that frankly needs a bit more attention from everybody in the industry, and that's input providers, producers, processors, consumer packaged goods companies, retailers, which is the more advancement we make right now that improves metrics broadly, right? And we talked about that nexus between improving profitability and improving environmental metrics. That is the prime chance then for regulatory avoidance. And I think that's what basically anybody I've talked to in the industry is interested in. So I think there is a strong value for producers to say, hey, well, we can show continued progress, right? Where we can show measured success in things that they're already doing today that are very intelligent, and things that could be experimented on top of that. That makes a strong case to say, hey, let the market monitor this. We're doing a good job with it, versus requiring additional regulation that could be, again, very ham-fisted in what we see as an outcome to that. From a metric standpoint, we could probably pick a half dozen things there that we think could be better collected. And obviously, a lot of us are trying to do that.
You've been in the industry quite some time, especially on the sustainability side, and then even prior to that in other industries that obviously relied on the data to further the advancement of that industry. So what do you see, kind of in a wrap up, where do you see this heading? Have you seen the progress? Are we accelerating and finally coalescing around some of these things, especially when it comes to sustainability? What's on the horizon for us, if just seeing what's taking place?
Sure. Well, Steve, I think if there's another parallel back to where we started this discussion between public health outcomes and planetary health outcomes, I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is, to me, an incredibly compelling story of human willpower acting through the private sector in partnership with the public sector to deliver innovation, right? We're finding companies making ventilators that wouldn't have even conceived of doing that 3 months ago, right? We're seeing drugs that sit in existence that had nothing to do with coronavirus, that might have been there for influenza or malaria or other AIDS, and now finding good potential applicability here because the private sector is responding and being innovative with the right goals and the right missions in mind. And so that's very uplifting, I think, to the human spirit to see us respond and be intelligent to it. We have to point out the same people in food and ag who are doing that and are helping set the tone and lead the discussion. I would call out a couple like Syngenta. They've had a good growth program in place now for a couple years. And you look at someone like Joe Wheeler, who has helped communicate a lot of what's going on now globally that Syngenta has led the discussion on, that looks towards positive environmental outcomes to things that they touch all throughout the food and ag supply chain. That's representative of the way we can all be thinking, even for businesses that are very small or very young compared to that. That helps advance the equation. I think when you look to another example, maybe on the consumer packaged goods side of a company like General Mills, who has helped lead the discussion for a number of years and did things that I know some people thought were really bold. They're doing more than leading the discussion, right, Steve? They're actually delivering on some of those commitments now. So when we see people lead that discussion, and now you see really good, pragmatic, non-governmental organizations like the Nature Conservancy step up on that as well and find ways to put good, tangible projects in place that help benefit the producer, help benefit the processor, help benefit the end outcomes, so that we're making consistent progress together. Man, what more could we ask for? That's the way we have to think, and that's the way we have to collaborate and be honest where there are gaps. And if we need better data, or if we need better technology, or we need better participation, or we need better incentive models, then let's not give up, because this is a bit like, right, Endgame, right? This is the fight of our lives, is to find a way to feed people and not further damage ecosystems and take into account the harsh realities that people like the World Bank have pointed out for farmers worldwide if we don't improve the climate change situation for them.
Well, and I think the one thing that is always kind of unique in agriculture, and I use the example of the book 40 Chances by Howard Buffett. And agriculture is very cyclical. Obviously, and many times you're dealing with one crop per year, and so data, you just can't go out and recreate a planting season, 2 weeks later or 2 months later, and just recreate that data. So there's a long lead time in some of these cases that you kind of alluded to earlier. And so, from the importance of a grower standpoint, missing out on a data collection from planting or spraying or harvest or whatever action takes place in that field just leaves a gap and an uncertainty and a question mark, obviously. And I think that's kind of an interesting message of that Farmobile has really wanted to say, hey, there is all these different layers of data or layers of the cake that must be mixed together to get that perfect recipe. And so, when it comes down to, at the end of the day, what's your message on how important this is? Because it's not just an agronomic data, which a lot of times is the same type of data that's being used for sustainability and the economics around everything, but the realization that this is a bigger deal than maybe we first thought.
I think that's the exact same mentality that Farmobile has boldly held up from the beginning of its origins, which is that the producer needs to be rewarded for their data and the data they've helped compile to provide it. And I think these systems will work, and I think they will be virtuous cycles if we take into account whatever your role in the industry is. Make sure we understand that data is coming from a farmer, and we need to reward them as a part of that process because it is their data to do that. And if we do that broadly, we're creating a new revenue stream for those producers, and frankly, giving a lot of incentivization for more engagement that will lead to better profitability, to better environmental outcomes, to better land and water usage, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions per bushel of crop delivered, all those good things.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts as far as just that you'd like to leave with, as far as especially around Earth Day and what that means? Hopefully, happier days ahead.
You know, it's interesting, Steve, when you think on Earth Day, like I said, it's a good time for reflection. And a lot of us get caught up into our daily routines, and we forget that there's a very simple, to use the business term, value proposition around what we're doing. There was a great book written just a few years ago called The Blue Mind, and about how being around the oceans, around how being around water, and if you can't do that, at least around forests and natural settings, do very positive things for your mental health, and something that is statistically proven in many relationships. And if you take that mentality, the author was conveying what he often hands out in his talks are little blue marbles. And he hands those out routinely for people to be able to sit back and visualize, this is it. I mean, this is the planet that we have. This is all we have to work from to do it. And it's predominantly blue, right? So the health of everything we do on the land very much impacts the health of the oceans. It impacts the health of these ecosystems all the way around the planet. Climate becomes very much a planetary subject, not just something to be concerned about in whatever state or country or province or prefecture you live in. And from that mentality, this is our home. This is a stewardship issue that every world major religion calls out eloquently, and that we have a natural inclination to want to deliver on. So let's do it. Let's think about that blue marble.
Steve and Bradford, I want to thank you guys for your time today. Thank you so much for sitting down in our virtual space to discuss the importance of Earth Day and how data can help improve in our ecosystems and our Earth. And I think your guys' passion for the subject really showed forth today. So thank you guys so much for taking time.